All right, you're listening to Hawk Talk. I'm here today with Leroy Chiao. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. How are you doing?
Good, good. So I just expect that I imagine you're in the delivery room, and I think that you were originally born in space, right? Like just from the beginning, you were born an astronaut, and that's just how this worked, right?
Maybe in another dimension, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, take me back. Where are you originally from?
So I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My parents were both originally from China. They fled China to Taiwan right after the war, and they were young teenagers then. But by the time I was born, they had immigrated to the United States.
Got it. And what did your parents do? Like, what were they into? Like, yeah, what were you kind of witnessing growing up?
Yeah, my parents were both technical people. They had degrees in chemical engineering, and they came to the U.S. for graduate school at the University of Rhode Island. And then, after graduating, they went to, I think, let's see, where did they go? Cleveland briefly, and then Milwaukee, where I was born.
Got it. Awesome. And in what kind of jobs did they get into? Were they in research, or what were they doing while you were a kid?
Yeah, so let's see. At the time, my mother was not working because she was taking care of my older sister and then me.
Uh-huh.
But my father, worked as an engineer, and I think at the time he worked at a government laboratory before moving on to Kansas, where my younger sister was born,
Nice.
where he worked for Koch Industries making oil field piping, and then eventually we settled in California, which is where we all grew up, the kids, that is. And he worked at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And by that time, my mom had gotten a job at a couple of different places, then settled at Dow Chemical.
Okay, got it. So you had, as you said, engineering, very intelligent, hardworking parents. Well, it's
Right,
funny because usually you have, what did you want to be when you grow up? And people say astronaut or fireman or musician,
right.
whatever it is. Did you want to be an astronaut from the beginning? Was this something that was in your blood?
Yeah, since I was very young, I was always fascinated by airplanes and rockets, and so I grew up during the space race,
Uh-huh.
and 1960s, and I was 8 years old when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, landed the first humans on the moon, and I just thought that was just such an incredible event, and I just remember looking up at the moon later and realizing up there almost a quarter of a million miles away, these two astronauts were getting ready to take their first walk. And I thought, wow, I want to be like those guys.
Yeah.
So that's where the dream started. I was always interested in technical things too. So I kind of followed in my parents' footsteps and knew I was going to study engineering, which would qualify me. I found out later would, of course, qualify me to apply to NASA. While I was at school getting my undergraduate degree, we launched the first space shuttle. And I thought, wow, okay, things have just opened up. It's no longer just for fighter pilots to apply to NASA. Now they're recruiting also scientists and engineers. So I thought, okay, I really have a shot at making it.
Well, that's
And
interesting. So
so
you didn't spend your childhood like, I want to be an astronaut. I'm going to set the path in front of me. You were like, that's really cool. And I'm going to go into engineering, but not necessarily because it's going to put me on the moon or be the next person in space.
Right. So I knew that the numbers were such that, I couldn't count on becoming an astronaut, but
Yeah.
but I loved technical things and I was always building things. Even when I was pretty young, I was always out in the garage, getting scraps of wood and making airplanes and boats and,
Yeah.
cars, things like that, and messing around with electrical circuits, lights and switches, and, making those little back then we had these little kits where you could make little radios and stuff that you could buy from Radio Shack. So I was always doing those kinds of things. So I knew I was going to be a technical person. That's what where my interests lay. And so, but that also qualified me. So, I actually did want to become a fighter pilot. I was in school. And I joined Air Force ROTC with the intention of going down that path. But then before I actually had to sign on the dotted line, I took a physical, and my left eye had gone imperfect, and so I couldn't be a military pilot. And they said, "Well, we'll make you a navigator." I'm like, nah, no thanks.
Yeah.
So I was able to back out of that. But then, like I said, since they were opening up opportunities for scientists and engineers, I knew that I could try to get into NASA through that path.
Yeah. Got it. And so is that what you did right out of school? Like you went right for NASA, or what was kind of the path?
Yeah, so I was in graduate school after I finished my undergraduate degree. I went to school at Berkeley,
Mhm.
University of California. I went to graduate school right away in Santa Barbara, also the University of California.
Yep.
And while I was there, I was working on my doctorates, and I sent away for an application package from NASA. And so, I filled it all out, and actually, this was just before the Challenger accident. Gosh, in 1986.
Yep.
And I was in the middle of filling out my application when the Challenger accident happened, but that didn't deter me at all. And I completed the application, sent it in just a week or so after the accident. At that time, I wasn't quite
Well,
qualified
let me
yet.
touch on
I
that
got a,
because,
I
like,
got a.
you even kind of touched on it slightly, but like, it didn't dissuade you at all. What was the thought there? Was it just didn't matter, or was it more like, now I really like? How did that just not change anything, or did it make you more motivated?
Yeah, it really didn't change anything. I mean, I knew that, just like any mishap, especially a flight mishap,
Yep.
there was going to be a thorough investigation. We were going to learn from that mishap
Yeah.
and apply those lessons to try to keep something like that from happening again, or at least lowering the chances. And so, by that time, I had also started taking flying lessons while I was in graduate school because
Nice.
always wanted to learn to
Out
fly.
of Santa Barbara at
And
SBA.
yeah, over at SBA,
Yeah.
exactly right. And got my license there, my primary training and my license. And
So I
so
got
it
my
didn't deter
license.
me at all.
My cross country to get my license was from Santa Monica to SBA and back in.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Done a lot of
Yeah, flew into
training.
Santa Monica several times during my training
Yeah,
as well.
it's
Yeah.
awesome.
But yeah, no, it didn't deter me at all. So I sent my application in, and about a month later, I got a very nice postcard from NASA. Said, "Well, you don't quite qualify, meet our qualifications yet. Finish your degree, get some work experience, and apply again."
Uh-huh.
And so I did a few years later, and was fortunate to be asked to interview, and then to get selected. So
So it
that
was
was the
really right out of
beginning of
grad
the big
school you
adventure.
got into NASA.
Was that?
And so right out of grad school you went to NASA.
No, no, no.
Okay.
Actually, after grad school, I worked for about 3 years. I worked, well, let's see, yeah, about 3 years. I worked at a commercial company, Hexcel Corporation. They make advanced aerospace composites for aerospace and other applications, including sports, sporting goods. And if you're of my generation, you might remember Hexcel at one time made skis, Hexcel skis. So, but then I left there to go to work for the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, continuing work on
Is that where you said your
aerospace
dad worked?
materials. Yeah, yeah. My dad also worked there, but he had retired by
Yeah.
that point. And so, I came in a few years after he retired,
Nice.
and was working there. And that's when I put my second application into NASA. And that time I did get asked to interview.
And what was your dream at that point? Where you were on you're getting trained as a pilot, so I assume you wanted to be on the space shuttle, but like, or is that why you were applying, or you just like, I want to work at NASA in general? If I get on the space shuttle, great.
Oh no, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it would have been interesting to work as an engineer at NASA, but I was on a good path where I was with the national laboratories, and so really, in my mind, it was kind of like, well, I want to become an astronaut. Otherwise, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing here.
Yeah. Got it. And so did you land in NASA? Like, I actually don't know how the jobs work. Did you land there knowing you were in the astronaut program, or did you just land a job and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay.
No, I interviewed specifically for the astronaut office, and it was a week long interview, but the actual interview was only an hour. The rest of the week was a big medical exam.
Yeah.
They poked and prodded us every which way. Things that you'd never really thought about.
Yeah.
And so,
passed.
and it might surprise you to learn that on average, about 50% of the people that get asked to interview for one reason or another don't pass the medical exam.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I was fortunate. At the end of the week, they told me I had a thumbs up, and on the medical side, so I was still in the running.
I'd be curious to see what that whole breakdown is. Like, it'd be fun to know if like I could pass, maybe not at this age, but in general could pass it. Like, it's a fun, like, maybe aspiration of, can you get all your biomarkers to a place where you would have actually been able to be an astronaut? And so then from there, what's the process? How, like, you're now hired as a potential astronaut and started to training.
Right.
Yeah. Tell me more about
Yep, yep. So you get that life-changing phone call, and and then several months later, you're moving to Houston, and all astronauts are based in Houston, all U.S. astronauts, I should say. And so, all the normal things in a relocation: come down, find a place to live, move all your stuff down, and start work. And so, first day of work as a federal employee, you get sworn in. Raise your right hand and and swear allegiance to the Constitution and the United States government. And then, you're with a class. So my class, there were 23 members in my astronaut class. We came from all different walks of life. Of course, a lot of military test pilots from the different services, a lot of research engineers like me, a couple of medical doctors, a couple of physicists to round out the group. And we all kind of met each other and started learning about NASA and started our training on space shuttle systems and how NASA works, taking field trips together, to the different NASA centers and contractors that were, producing parts and shuttles for the shuttles and also for the coming space station. So really the first year was that kind of basic training, if you will, after which we were officially given our silver pin, which means that we had completed that first bit of training, and then waiting for our opportunities to get flight assignments where we could earn our gold pin, which you get right after your first mission.
Awesome. Got it. And so how long did it take you to get to that first mission from when you got hired?
Yeah, so I launched about 4 years after arriving at NASA, and that was really, of course, I mean, can't even describe it. It was the thrill of getting into a vehicle and launch into space after having dreamed about it since I was a little kid
When to
and
get there, I'm
worked so
curious,
hard.
is it normally 4 years? Is there like a protocol of training for 4 years, or was it just that was the timing of the shuttle and when it was
Well, back then it was right around that time frame,
there?
kind of 3, 4 years, and because I came in through no planning of my own, just good luck on timing. We came in right in the heart of the shuttle program, and so we were flying a lot. We were flying probably 6 or 7 missions a year,
Yeah.
between 5 and 7 missions a year. Each mission takes 7 astronauts, so that's on average, say 5 missions, 35 astronauts a year,
Yeah.
right? And so, we didn't have to wait that long to get a flight assignment and to actually get to go fly. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot different now, with our flight rate of just, basically twice, well, 4 launches of, 3 month kind of staggered intervals for a 6 month stay on the station. So on average, you get maybe 3 or 4 Americans a year that get to go fly on the space station, as opposed to back then,
Yeah.
we had 35 Americans flying a year on board space shuttles. So we got to fly relatively quickly and got turned around relatively quickly. And that's why over my 15-year career, I did get to go on 4 missions,
Nice.
including the long stay on the space station where I was the commander.
So on the first shuttle flight, what was it? Obviously, you've trained for 4 years. What was surprising to you?
Yeah, so you never, even though you're very well trained,
Right.
you don't really know quite what to expect,
Right.
right? And so you've seen the pictures, you've talked to the people that have been there, you've been in the simulator hundreds of hours, but nothing really prepares you for that first launch. You get into the vehicle, very familiar surroundings because of all the training, but it looks like a brand new simulator. The simulators are all kind of beat up. All
Yeah.
the panels are scratched up from the years of use and all that. But the actual space shuttle, panels look brand new, because they've hardly been used.
Yeah.
And so you get in, you're very, very familiar with everything. But as the countdown, we had a kind of a funny, interesting countdown as well, because the weather was bad. We didn't expect to launch, but we were going to try anyway. The weather was bad forecast to be bad at the Cape. It was forecast to be bad at the abort sites overseas. And so we get into the vehicle and we're kind of have a mindset of we're not going to fly today. But then as we start counting down and we get to a planned 20-minute hold and said, okay, well, the weather's looking a little better, but we're not really sure. We're going to keep counting, and then get into the 10-minute hold, and then to kind of keep, okay, well, we're going to keep counting, but we're going to hold at 6 minutes, before we do a critical step called APU pre-start, which is the auxiliary power units that supply the hydraulic pressure for all the control surfaces and actuators. They didn't want to start that too early and burn up a lot of fuel for it.
Yeah.
And so, but as we approached 6 minutes, suddenly the weather cleared. The weather cleared at the Cape, the weather cleared overseas, and they announced, okay, we're not going to hold at 6, we're going to keep going. They're like, oh, suddenly,
Yeah.
The adrenaline hits, and it's like, oh my God, we're going to go.
Yeah.
And we get a final call at about a minute and a half that, Columbia, close and lock your visors, initiate oxygen flow, and have a good flight. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So then, at that point, we're all keyed up. And, of course, nobody's been talking because you want to have a sterile cockpit in the last, part of the countdown. And then, you feel the main engine start, because the main engines would start about 6.5 seconds before launch. The computers, when they assess that the main engines are running properly at T0, the main computers send the command to light those solid rocket boosters on the side, and then you're on your way,
Yeah.
And so we were, felt the rumble, felt the twang. Actually, it's interesting, the space shuttle, because the main engines are not on the center line. When they fire, you've got 1.5 million pounds of thrust pushing that stack, and the top of the vehicle actually swings forward about 3 feet. And then when it comes back, when it springs back, right when it's vertical again, that's when the solid rocket motors fire. And when that happened, boy, it was literally an explosion. Those solid rocket motors add almost 5 million pounds of thrust, and you're literally exploded off the pad. A lot of vibration, a lot of noise. If you look at old videos of the space shuttle launches, it looks like it almost kind of lumbers off the pad slowly. But by the time it's cleared the tower, it's already going over 100 miles an hour.
And so what is the G-force you pull when you blast off in that?
Yeah, so the G-forces aren't that bad. It's not like the movies. Like I said, you get that initial jolt when the solids light and you get exploded off the pad.
Yeah.
And then higher up in the profile, when you're accelerating to orbital velocity of 17,500 miles an hour, you're limited to 3 Gs. So you have 3 Gs kind of through the chest.
Yeah.
Kind of feels like someone's kind of sitting on your chest. It takes a little extra effort to breathe, but it's not that big a deal. And so, it's not all like the movies.
Yeah, your face isn't.
But I mean, it's still a thrill.
Yeah.
And during that first part of the launch, I mean, you can hear the wind noise, and you can hear the pitch of the wind changing really rapidly, which tells you how quickly you're accelerating. And within about a little over 70 seconds, you've gone supersonic, and you just keep accelerating.
Yeah, and you also casually just said 17,500 miles an hour. Just the knowledge that you're going to be getting to that is got to be pretty amazing. And so once you got up, like anything, I mean, as you said, you've seen it in the movies, you look out the window, Earth starts to get smaller and smaller. You see you're in space. Is that what it looks like? Like, is that the feeling you look out the window?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So I was on the flight deck for launch, and I was sitting underneath one of the overhead windows of the shuttle, and I had a mirror with me, and I could hold the mirror and look out the overhead. And of course, the shuttle kind of heels over after it launches, so I could see the ground and how quickly we were rushing away from the ground. I could see some of the flames from the engines, and it was pretty spectacular how fast we were moving and how fast we were accelerating. It only takes a little over, it took the shuttle a little under 9 minutes, 8.5 to 9 minutes to get into low Earth orbit.
Oh, wow. And so in lower Earth orbit, are you fully weightless at that point?
Oh, yeah. Once the main engine's cut off, you're instantly weightless.
Yeah.
And, you're in microgravity.
Yeah.
And, immediately your gyros kind of tumble, your inner ear system, all those little rocks in your otolith are spinning around, telling your brain that you're rotating in all 3 axes. Of course, your eyes tell you you're not. That can be provocative, can make you feel kind of nauseous, You get instantly full-headed because there's no longer gravity pulling all the fluids and the blood down into your lower extremities. They all kind of come up into your chest and your head, and you feel like you're laying head down on an inclined plane, so you get that kind of full-headed feeling. In fact, if you look at astronauts or photographs or video of astronauts the first few days in space, they're really puffy, for that reason. And in fact, over those couple of days, your body will eliminate about 2 liters of water. And that's how much less water you carry when you're in space. So just imagine one of those big soda bottles.
Yeah.
That's how much less water.
Do you just need less, or what is the reason for that?
Well, it's just because, your body, when you're not in gravity and all that fluid goes into your chest and your head, all the sensors in your body say, oh, I've got too much water on board. I got to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I'm bloated with water. And so on the flip side, when we come down, we've got to go through a protocol where we take salt tablets and drink water so that we're not 2 liters dehydrated when we land.
Yeah.
Because that's going to cause problems too. Yeah. So we've learned a lot over the years going to space, and so those are some of the big picture, biomedical effects of traveling up there.
No, funny enough, like my one experience with space is I went to the Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas, and did space camp when I was in 7th grade. But they actually had us hang upside down. I forgot how long, and then propped up and took pictures and were telling us that's how it is when you first go to space too. I remember that. Right. We did the centrifuge. We did all these different things to.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
And so, how long were you in space the first trip?
Yeah, so the first mission was a little over 13 days.
Okay.
Most shuttle missions were kind of 10 days to 14 days,
Yeah.
thereabouts. Yeah.
And what were you doing out there specifically? What was your job once you were up?
Yeah, so our mission was the second international microgravity lab, and it was an international flight. And so we actually had a Japanese astronaut with us. In fact, the first Japanese woman to fly into space. And so our job on that 2 week mission was to work in the space lab. It's a module that we had that could go into the space shuttles. Now, this is before we had International Space Station. So this is the main way we used to do research work. So we spent, we kept that lab going 24 hours. So we split into 2 shifts, 12 on, 12 off to run experiments in that laboratory module.
Uh-huh.
And by the end of that time, we had accomplished over 80 different investigations. So we were pretty proud of that. But yeah, so it was purely a research mission on that flight.
Yeah. And any groundbreaking discoveries that you can share or remember like from that first mission?
Yeah, there was some pretty cool stuff going on. We were continuing to do protein crystal growth experiments. So basically the idea is that you can grow these protein crystals of these molecules or viruses that you're trying to attack, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, you can build a more perfect model of it in 0G. And so that helps pharmaceutical companies develop, therapies that can attack those molecules. And so we did a lot of that. We did some interesting metallurgy experiments. It was a German experiment. We were able to take metal alloys, little balls, and heat them up in a chamber, melt them, and let them cool and recrystallize and form different structures than they would in the presence of gravity. So the possibility of creating different alloys in space, different structures of metals that would yield different properties. So we did a lot of different things like that. We had some biomedical experiments. The Japanese flew some small animals, some Japanese red-bellied newts. We had some goldfish, some what we call medaka fish, which are kind of like little minnows. And let's see, what else? We had jellyfish, some like tiny little baby jellyfish. It was an American experiment because all these animals have gravity sensing organs like we do, the otoliths, which help them tell up and down, right? Yeah. And so we did different experiments on them. Yeah, so it was kind of a wide variety. Most of our experiments in space focus either on biomedical effects so that we can learn more about what happens to humans so that we can support a mission to places like Mars in the future, or material science. A lot of interesting things can happen, as I mentioned, that metallurgy experiment, in the absence of gravity.
Yep. And so what was the biggest surprise memory from that first mission? What was like the thing that stands out the most?
Yeah, so being floating around in 0G is pretty weird, but what was surprising is how quickly the humans we can adapt to that. In fact, after a couple of days, it just seems normal to float around. You've learned how to operate in that environment and do things. It was also surprising to me how easy it is to lose things in space, right? I mean, you can't just set something down, right? I mean, you've got to either Velcro it to a Velcro patch, or you've got to put it under an elastic band. But then if somebody goes by and bumps into it and knocks it loose, it's flying around somewhere. Yeah. And most of the time you can find it in the air filters, but sometimes things get lost for a long time. Sometimes things get lost kind of forever. Yeah. And it's surprising, even big things. You think, well, I had a baggie of disk drives. And so it got knocked loose, and it took me, the better part of a day before it came floating out again somewhere, and I found it, but it's like, you got this big thing. How can it be lost? How can I not see it?
I mean, is there like a re-entry point where you all of a sudden hear like someone's keys hit the ground because gravity triggered back in again? Like, oh, there they are.
Well, it could happen. Yeah. What's interesting is in shuttle and during space shuttle flights, I remember one case where somebody lost his watch, right? Just gone. Watch is gone. Don't know where it is. And then a couple missions later, his watch came floating out from somewhere, and then, so that crew got his watch and gave it back to him.
That's amazing. That's fun. And so, as you said, you did 3 other missions other than that, right?
Yep.
And so how did it progress? Was it just as exciting the next time and the next time and the next time, or like, was it?
Yeah. So it was really exciting because I got to do different things on all 4 of my missions. My first mission was the science flight. Second mission, the big deal for me, I got to put on the big white spacesuit and go outside and lead my first two spacewalks,
Yeah.
And so that was a surreal experience. Again, doing a spacewalk is nothing at all like the movies, but getting out there
And
and
how so? Like,
being.
what is it like?
Yeah, so in the movies they show, oh, you basically put your spacesuit on like clothes. It
Yeah.
takes a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
You walk into a huge room that's an airlock, and within a few seconds, it's all down to vacuum. You open the outside door and you kind of walk outside,
Yeah.
and then it's all silent inside your suit. You can hear yourself breathe. You can hear your heartbeat, all that stuff, and it's so easy to move around. None of that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, it takes hours to get into your suit, get everything buttoned up, and get into the airlock. The airlock is tiny because you want to minimize the amount of gas you're going to lose overboard,
Yeah.
or you have to pump into the cabin, and so you're cramped in there with two of you in your spacesuits, and then all the equipment you have to bring out. It takes a while to depressurize because you have to stop at certain points to do leak checks and make sure your suit's okay, make sure everything else is still solid. And then once you finally get the hatch open, you go outside and you're in the spacesuit. It's loud. It's really loud.
Huh.
You've got a fan that's blowing oxygen over your face, and so that's a good sound.
Yeah.
If that goes quiet, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's pressurized, right? You're pressurized,
Yeah.
so you can stay alive. But that means that you're working inside a balloon, so it's not effortless to move around. You've got to be in really good physical shape.
Yeah.
Just moving your fingers or your arms exerts, muscle strength. And by the end of 6.5 hour spacewalk, I mean, you're pretty
6.5
tired.
hours.
You're
Yeah.
pretty beat up.
Yeah.
And so it's not at all like the movies. It's not simple to do anything.
And what's the purpose
out
of
there.
spacewalks? I know in general, like to repair the space station and they do things like
Mhm.
that. But like when you were doing it, was it just to experiment on spacewalking or what was the idea there?
Yeah, so my first spacewalks on that second mission, we were testing tools and construction techniques that we would later use to build the ISS.
Got it.
Right? And so we went outside and did things like evaluate these trays, these folding cable trays, attaching electrical cables to their mating them to their sockets.
Yeah.
And the reason all that's important is because these electrical cables. I mean, when you're in space, the temperature can get down to minus 250 Fahrenheit. If you're away from the sun, and these cables, the plastic, the insulation, it gets really stiff.
Yeah.
It's not at all like room temperature where it's no problem.
Yeah.
And so we were able to demonstrate that we could do those things. We had special tools that we used. We have a power tool. It's like your kind of the your DeWalt or,
Yeah.
or Mikata.
Real.
A power tool with a socket wrench on the end.
Uh-huh.
We were able to demonstrate how to use that and restraints, that kind of hold you in place. So we tested a whole bunch of different tools on that particular one.
And how are you?
And then on my third mission, I got to put that into practice. We were the second major assembly mission of the ISS program. So we brought two big pieces with us in the shuttle payload bay.
Uh-huh.
We positioned them over the station with a robotic arm, and then I led the spacewalking team. Two teams, 4 spacewalks. We went out and used some of those tools that I helped to develop to bolt those pieces onto the station and connect up the electrical and the fluid cables to bring them to life. So that was pretty cool, getting to actually help build the station. And then on my fourth flight, I trained with the Russians and spent a lot of time in Russia and Kazakhstan. We launched on a Russian spacecraft, Soyuz rocket, and Soyuz spacecraft. I was kind of the co-pilot on that. We flew up to the ISS, then I was the commander of the ISS for 6.5 months.
And ISS was just doing, I mean, it's constantly doing experiments that you could only do on these 2-week trips. Now you could do for 6 months.
Yeah, right.
And how often were people coming and going?
Back then we've always been, since the station was going, we've always been flying 6-month missions, more or less. And the reason for that is logistically that works out kind of convenient. But also on a practical level, when we talk about going to Mars, when the planets are lined up, even at closest approach, when they are lined up, the one-way trip is, typically around 6 months, right? And so that way we can study, okay, well, what happens to the human body during 6 months of microgravity or weightlessness, near weightlessness.
Yeah.
And so that's basically continuing today. But right now, back then it was just 6 months, new crew launches, 6 months. Now we've got it staggered where every 3 months there's a launch and you're replacing half of the crew.
Got it.
But each crew member still stays for 6
Yeah, that makes
months.
sense because then there's people that are there that have been there that can help assist in that too. Like the
Right,
transition's a little different. That makes a lot of sense.
right.
And what year were you up in the space station? ISS?
Yeah, so I was on the station from October of '04 to April of '05,
Yep.
so some years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And how, like, what was, again, going back to the surprises, like, what do you think you don't know in the movies? Like, how was it? What were the surprises, even with training on the space station, living there for 6 months?
Yeah, it was funny because by the time I flew to the space station, I'd flown 3 space shuttle missions. I had a
Yeah.
cumulative time of, somewhere around 34 days in space or so.
Yeah.
So I thought I knew it all, right?
Yeah.
Once you get up on the station and you're up there for several, I mean, basically you're up there for 6 months.
Yeah.
After they're up there for a while, longer than a 2-week shuttle mission, you start learning how to do things more efficiently. You're much better at flying around, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You're not bumping into stuff, and you just get better at doing everything. And your body kind of continues to change probably for about a month to 2 months. I would say your body continues to kind of adapt to the environment. Like, for an example, on shuttle missions, pretty much everyone lost weight, right, for on a 2-week mission. And that was for a variety of reasons. Number one, I think your body's under stress
Yeah.
because you're in a weird environment, right?
Right.
And so maybe you don't have as much of an appetite, you're not
Yeah.
eating as much. Plus, you're not eating as much because, frankly, the food in the space food's not as good as the food here.
Yeah.
It's a pain to eat. You gotta, you've got these packages you have
Yeah.
to rehydrate or heat up, or a can you've got to open, and then you got to be careful not to let everything go flying,
Yeah.
flying everywhere. So it's kind of a pain to eat, maybe eat less. But also, I think your body is just adapting, because I found on the station over the first 2 weeks, we all lost a little weight, lost a few pounds. But then over the second 2 weeks, or even a little bit longer, we gained it all back. It's kind of like your body settles in
Yeah.
and figures it all out.
Right.
So, but yeah, so there were some surprises like that. Let's see what else.
I'm really
What
curious
else was-
in terms of floating around, how often is it that like the new person like gets up there and like pushes off something and realizes now you can't stop yourself and just goes slamming into something else? Like, is that?
Yeah, no, that happens.
Yeah.
And, some people adapt more quickly than others. And we kind of make jokes about some of the people who are a little bit more, rambunctious.
Yeah.
And, they call them like, I had a term for people like that. I call them a baby moose, kind of trying to flail around but most of us were, pretty good about.
You just see someone
Yeah.
across the hallway spinning, just like.
Yeah, well, what you have to be careful about is if you kind of get out of control, you might accidentally, try to grab onto something to stop yourself and throw some switches you didn't mean to throw.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
Has that happened?
yeah, it has happened. It has happened. Fortunately, nothing too serious.
Yeah.
The really critical switches are either you have to, throw two, or they're lever locked,
Yeah.
Somehow guarded, so you can't accidentally.
Yeah.
There's some very critical switches you don't want to hit
Right.
if you don't intend to.
And so you ended your last mission in 2005. What happened next? What was kind of, were you expecting that to be your last, or was that just like?
Yeah, I had decided that was going to be my last flight. Gosh, I had a wonderful 15-year flying career. I got to do everything I could do at NASA. I'd done research and work in space. I'd done spacewalks in both American and Russian suits,
Yeah.
helping to build the station. I was a commander of the station, got to fly up and down on a Russian spacecraft.
Yeah.
And so it was time to leave and go do something else. I was about to turn.
What were you doing between these? Was it just more training and research, or?
Yeah, no, between flights, astronauts are supporting other flights, or
Got it.
supporting NASA in other ways. And so, you might be in the Mission Control Center
Yep.
supporting other missions, talking to the crew. You might be down at the Cape following the flow of refurbishment of the space shuttles. You might be, in my case, I worked first in crew equipment, and first in the shuttle avionics integration lab, which was helping to test flight software. Now, make sure that every new drop of software didn't have any bugs in it that we didn't,
Yep.
might surprise us. Then I was a crew equipment guy, and then I worked in the EVA, the Spacewalk. EVA is
Yep.
extravehicular activity. All issues around that. And then after my space station mission, I was the chief of the astronaut office, EVA office, and then I got to fly my last flight and left after that. So yeah, I was
So
about
you
to
left
turn.
NASA after the last flight?
Yeah, after 15 years,
Yep.
after my last mission, I was about to turn 45, and I thought, well, I could stay and fly again, but it'll be a few years.
Yep.
And it's a lot better to leave and try to do something else at 45 than 50,
Yep.
so I left NASA and stayed in the Houston area, and I kind of took a leap and went out and started doing stuff on my own, just working for myself rather than to go and work for one of the contractors
Yep.
or even staying at NASA in management. I decided to go off and try my hand at being an entrepreneur of sorts.
Sure. And what did you end up doing? What was the business?
Yeah, so I started doing a lot of different things. I started working at university. I was a endowed chair professor at Louisiana State University part time. I was working as a consultant for other commercial space companies. I became part of a startup, a space startup that was pretty interesting. We were trying to refurbish heritage Russian components for use in commercial space.
Yep.
And then kind of just moved around, and some years ago, I started co-founded a company called One Orbit, and we have a corporate side, does the things that you would expect, leadership training, keynotes for conventions
Yep.
and meetings and things like that, and we also have a motivational side for kids, where we do sponsored education programs where one of our bigger clients runs a series of STEM camps around the country in the summertime. So we're about to get real busy sending myself and several other astronauts kind of around the country to go talk to middle school kids who are going to these camps.
Love that.
Yeah, so it's fun, and I'm also part of a new startup that I've been working on for some years with some of my friends, and it's a space related kind of a lunar technology startup. So kind of keeping myself busy. I guess my biggest thing since leaving NASA, while I was married at the time, I've been divorced for I guess coming up on 4 years, but having kids, having a family, I finally decided at that age I actually wanted to have a family.
Yeah.
So I got started in the kid game late, but they just finished their junior year in high school, and
Awesome. Hey, so you have
they're going to
twins?
turn. Pardon me?
You have twins?
Yeah, twins.
Yep.
Yeah, yep. I have a
Awesome.
boy and a girl, twins. So very happy about that.
Yep.
And they're trying to. They've kind of been my focus. I've been trying to help them figure out what path they're going to take and what
Are
they
they going
want to do.
astronaut? What are you thinking?
No, no. It's kind of funny. Well, my son Henry, he wants to be a medical doctor, so I'm
Very cool.
encouraging him to pursue that path. My daughter Caroline, she wants to go in a completely different direction. She wants to become a writer, and
Nice.
she's interested in studying English and creative writing. So I'm kind of figuring that out with her. I want to support her in her passion. But at the same time, I'm like, well, maybe think about, maybe double major in
Yeah.
something that,
Have a
is something
backup.
you could think you could at least support yourself while you're pursuing being a writer.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Awesome. And so, a couple more questions for you. Number one, I mean, it sounds like what's next is your kids growing up and working on this lunar project. Is there anything else
Right.
coming down the pike for you, or is that the focus?
Yeah, that's the focus right now, along with One Orbit. That's continuing very well. And so, those three things. I'm still teaching part time at Rice University here in Houston, and also the Baylor College of Medicine. I do a little bit of stuff for them.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, other than that, I'm kind of really enjoying life right now. I still flying airplanes. I've had a little airplane for a number of
What are you
years,
flying?
and I've been flying. I have a little Grumman Tiger, which is a
Nice.
single engine airplane with
Yep.
4 seats and kind of cool, low wing, sliding canopy,
Yep.
a little sexy. And so, yeah, I've been flying the airplane more often. And gosh, I guess in October I will have been flying airplanes for 40 years.
Nice.
So,
How many hours?
yeah, I've got about 3,300 total hours.
Solid.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's been good.
And last question for you, which sounds like you actually focus on this now. So, if you're talking to someone that wants to achieve their dreams, whatever they may be, what's something that you either wish you heard or did hear that helped you get here? Like it sounds like you just went for it and you became an astronaut. Like what was something again? You either did
Well,
hear or got
I
you there.
talked to. Yeah, well, I talk to the kids, especially middle school kids. Kind of the sweet spot
Yeah.
when you try to influence a kid. I say, hey, listen, figure out what you want to do. I mean, don't just kind of sit back and see what happens. Figure out what you want to do and try to make a plan and go in that direction. And I said, And it's okay if you don't know yet. And I mean, we all change our minds. And the thing is to be curious, go out there and learn about different professions. What do different people do? What sounds good? What are you good at? And I said, and if you give yourself an honest assessment on your abilities, then there's no reason to hold back on going for it. Because I said, in my case, I knew I was smart enough and healthy enough to be considered to be an astronaut. But if my passion had been to play in the NBA, that wasn't going to work out.
Yeah.
I'm 5'8", can't jump, not particularly athletic. That would have been an unrealistic dream. But I knew that I could pursue this dream and maybe make it happen. And so same thing for whatever you're interested in. If you do an honest assessment on yourself and you think you have the abilities and the skills to have a shot at it, go for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and these are things to try when you're young, right? Because then if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, you have time to shift gears and go do something else.
Love that. Well, Leroy, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on Hawk Talk.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, it's been great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Of course.